very welcome to the launch today of the report on children of migrants in Ireland. This is the 5th publication from a research partnership with the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth. And this programme has been designed to exploit the rich potential of growing up in Ireland data and to use that evidence to inform policy development. We're very grateful to this department for the support they've given for this research programme, and in particular to the Minister, Dr. Roderic O'Gorman, who has been very supportive of the programme overall and is launching the report today. We'd also like to express our thanks to the young people and their families who've taken part in growing up in Ireland. And we're actually in the field at the moment with the group, this cohort 08, that we are the focus of this study. We're in the field at the moment with them at 13 years of age. One of the advantages of growing up in Ireland has been that it provides large samples, which allows to look at groups of children and young people that aren't always well represented in research. In this case, children of migrant origin. And this new research study provides new insights into the development of children of migrant parents born in Ireland, following them from 9 months to 9 years of age, and therefore provides a very strong evidence base for policy formulation. I think the events of the past week remind us more and more of our roles and responsibilities as global citizens. So we'd like to say that our thoughts are very much with the Ukrainians at the moment, especially children and young people who are struggling to cope with adversity within and outside their country. So the format of today is that we're going to have the launch by the Minister, Frances McGinnity, on behalf of our co-authors Helen, Russell and Merike Darmody, will give an outline of the main findings of the study. We have a policy response from Ann Duffy from the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth. And Jane heads up the Equality and Gender Equality unit there. We're also delighted that we have a response from a young person, Diana Hrisovescu, a young woman of Romanian origin who's doing fascinating work developing an app to support non-English speakers in accessing government information. And we're grateful to her for pre-recording a video. And we're also very grateful to her teacher, Maura O'Higgins from Larkin Community College, for facilitating this input, which I think will really enrich the conversation. Please, we will have time for Q&A at the end. So please type your questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen rather than the chat function. And we'll try to get the 3 authors to respond to those, and we'll get Jane Ann to respond from a policy perspective as well. So with that in mind, I think we have a video from the Minister, is that right?
I'm delighted to launch this report, Children of Migrants in Ireland, How Are They Faring? I want to thank Emer for the invitation and the authors Merike, Fran and Helen for their excellent work. Today's report provides us with really valuable and timely longitudinal data that tracks the outcomes of children born in Ireland to at least one migrant parent. This data will be an important input to the National Action Plan Against Racism, which the Independent Anti-Racism Committee hope to submit to me in the coming weeks. It will also be a key input into the evaluation of the Migrant Integration Strategy 2017 to 2021 and the development of its successor. A little bit later on, Ann Duffy from my department will speak in more detail on the policy implications of this study, so I will limit myself to share with you 1 or 2 of the findings in this report in relation to early years education, which I find particularly interesting. While early education investments benefit children of both migrant and non-migrant backgrounds, the report provides some evidence to suggest that these investments are likely to benefit migrant origin children even more. The report also reinforces the importance of making sure our childcare provision is affordable, straightforward and clear so that it is easy for migrant parents to access and navigate. As you know, I have prioritised investment in early years education in the last number of years. This investment will ensure more and more migrant families benefit from access to formal preschool childcare, underpinning integration and long-term outcomes for these children and their families. The ECHE programme, which is the universal free preschool programme available to all eligible children before starting primary school, is now available for 2 years. In addition, the introduction of the National Childcare Scheme in 2019 aims to improve outcomes for children, reduce poverty, facilitate labour activation and tangibly reduce the costs of childcare for tens of thousands of families. I was struck by an OECD reference in the report that it is the integration of the second migrant generation that provides the real litmus test for integration, as many of the skills and experience of the first generation have been acquired abroad. This report provides us with data to begin that litmus test and also gives us some pointers in the direction we will need to go to improve the outcomes for young migrant origin children. A huge thank you to the ERSI for this excellent report. Thank you for listening and enjoy what will no doubt be a very interesting seminar.
Well, as always, it's great to have the Minister launch a report, and we're really grateful to him for his support for this programme and his engagement with the research findings. So I'd now like to introduce Fran McGinnity, who is going to provide an overview of the main findings. If questions or comments occur to you, please put them in the Q&A function. I'll hand over to Fran, who will share her screen.
Thanks, Emer. I'm just sharing my screen now, so you should be seeing a sack race, if that's going well. Yeah. So, hello and welcome. My name is Fran McGinnity. I'm an author of the report, and as Emer says, I'll be presenting on behalf of my co-authors, Merike Darmody and Helen Russell. I also coordinate research on migrant integration and demography at the ESRI, and as research coordinator, it's really great to see a report that looks at young children, and it's also great to be able to track the outcomes of migrant children over time. Integration is a process, it's not a state, so being able to follow people over time is both powerful and exciting for the insights it could give us. As Emer said, this report is part of a research programme on children and young people funded by the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth. We, the authors, would like to acknowledge the department's funding and their commitment to this programme, and we'd also like to thank the members of the steering board for their input, the GUI study team, the GUI families, and the CSO statisticians who facilitate access to the data for us, and of course, the Minister for his opening remarks. So, as many of you may know, rapid migration to Ireland in the early 2000s led to an increase in the number of adults born outside Ireland and children born in Ireland whose parents were born abroad. So after this wave of migration to Ireland, there were a large number of adult migrants, but also their children. As the Minister noted, some commentators have claimed that the outcomes of this, the so-called second generation, are actually the litmus test of integration, because actually a lot of the skills and experience acquired by adult migrants were acquired abroad. This report considers how migrant children differ from children with Irish parents in terms of their English language skills and their self-concept. This is important. So we're using in this report Irish children as the benchmark. This is typical in integration research, but it's important to bear in mind in this question of how high is high, how good are the skills. These children are all born in Ireland. Some have one parent born abroad, some have two parents born abroad. They're diverse in terms of the parents' country of origin, their ethnicity, and their language background. All factors we would like to investigate. Why do we look at language and self-concept of these children? We look at host country language, as it's called, in this case, of course, English, because host country language is really important. It's important for these children's learning, for their academic outcomes, but it's also important for their friendships, their participation in sport, cultural activities, their participation, in fact, in Irish life. A delay in language development may undermine equality of opportunities for them and damage their subsequent trajectories in Ireland. Of course, migrant children often have another language, and there's some research on this in Ireland. They often have another first language. In fact, if English is not their first, we focus in this report on English language skills, but I'd be happy to come back to this later in the discussion. We couldn't look at everything, and we wanted to choose an indicator of socio-emotional well-being rather than, say, maths achievement, to give a more rounded picture of these children. So we look at something called self-concept. This is children's own perceptions of their behaviour, appearance, popularity, and life satisfaction. If we look at previous international research on the topic, this has identified a number of influences which might help us to understand why migrant origin children's outcomes differ. One is the parents' country of origin. That's whether the parents come from Asia, whether they come from Eastern Europe or South America, the parents' ethnicity, and whether they're from a minority ethnicity, the family structure, whether the child has one Irish parent or two migrant parents, one parent or two. And very importantly, the children's linguistic background. The parents' linguistic background, whether in this case, whether the parents are native English speakers or not. And also a large focus in the international literature has been on parents' socioeconomic background. The argument goes as follows: if migrants come to a country like Ireland and they find themselves in lower segments of the labour market, they have poorer jobs and fewer resources that they can pass on to their children, and that this disadvantage is passed on to the next generation, this generation that we're looking at. So this is an important factor that we also have a look at. We're also interested in preschool participation and whether they have migrant children have access to this, and their interaction, their experience of schools, and whether they attend segregated schools. So our research questions: how is young children's English language ability related to their parents' country of origin, the parents' native language, and the parents' ethnicity? And do family resources account for any migrant origin penalty, as we call it? Does their experience of preschool and school in Ireland contribute to this difference? And then how do English language skills develop over time? Do migrant children catch up between age 3 and age 9, which is where we have the tests from? And then at age 9, do migrant origin children differ in their self-concept from their Irish origin peers at 9? Turning briefly to immigration in Ireland, this will be familiar to many of you who are interested in migrant integration. So this shows immigrant flows to Ireland by the country of origin. And what's interesting here is that the GUI 08 cohort, so that's the cohort of children born in Ireland in 2008, the first wave of this was right after a very large wave of immigration to Ireland. Migrants are typically young adults, and the timing of migration is often associated with family formation. In fact, counting children with either one or both parents born abroad, it may surprise some of you to know that a third of children in this 08 cohort are migrant origin. So it's a significant proportion, 1 in 3. Looking more closely here at the Growing Up in Ireland 08 cohort, just to give you a sense of how the survey works. The first wave was when the children were babies at 9 months, at infants in 2008. Then the same families were interviewed when the children were age 3 in 2011. There was a parental interview, and there were also cognitive tests of naming vocabulary in English. Can talk a little bit more about how exactly those worked at the end if anyone's interested. Then the children were interviewed when they were age 5. I don't know about riding bikes, but we do know that many of them had started school by this stage. They also do a cognitive test at age 5. And then in 2017, the children were followed up when they were age 9. Here we have the parent interview and a school reading test. Of course, the children are reading at this stage, so we use the scores from the child reading test. But we also have information that the children themselves filled out at age 9 on their self-concept. We don't have any information, obviously, on this from the earlier ages, but we do have this at age 9. So what do we do? As I've said, yes, so we're counting migrant origin as one or both parents born abroad, partly because we're interested on the basis of some work done by Stephanie Sprong and Jan Skopek that actually one parent, one Irish parent or one English-speaking parent may make a difference to children's language skills. Within this definition of migrant origin, we distinguish parental country of birth, linguistic background, and ethnicity. Those are the outcomes we look at. And the models we consider are mean English vocabulary, or at age 9, reading scores, and self-concept scores at age 9. We also consider low English vocabulary and reading achievement. The OECD, for example, always highlight that low achievers are maybe a particular focus of policy interests. And of course, then we also estimate models to explore progression over time. Looking at these children of migrants, then, if we look at parents' country of birth, as I've said, 1 in 3 are of migrant origin. 19% have both parents born abroad, and 14% have one parent born abroad. As many adult migrants to Ireland are native English speakers, of course, this means that there are actually only 16 in the non-native English speaker group. 11% of children where neither parent speaks English, and 5% where one parent is a non-native English speaker and one parent is a native English speaker. So what about these children's experience of institutions, as they're known, educational institutions in Ireland? This chart first shows the differences in access to preschool. That's before the ETCHE scheme. There was just 1 year in place at the time of this survey was conducted. So this is children in centre-based care, predominantly private care at age 3. And here we see that whereas about 30% of the sample overall and the children of UK-born parents were in centre-based care, actually almost half of the children from Western Europe and also high from the USA and Canada. In other groups, the proportion of children in preschool in centre-based care is actually much lower, 23% among East Europeans and 17% among Asians. As we know from other research, actually, it's children who are not from English-speaking backgrounds who gain most from the experience of preschool care at age 3. So the fact that they're not actually participating is of some concern. Looking now to the children when they're in school, using the DESH status of the school, it's whether they're whether the children are attending a disadvantaged school. We see that while about 20% of those who have 2 Irish parents are attending a DESH school, this is higher for migrant origin children where both are born abroad, 28%. It's actually a bit lower for children who have 1 parent born abroad and one in Ireland. Looking now at the outcome here, this is the children's English vocabulary scores at age 5. This particular scale has a mean of 55. And you can see here down the side, we've distinguished the children by their mother's country of birth, by the sort of combined parents' country of birth, and the parents' linguistic background. And here we see that whereas some migrant groups, the migrant origin children, their scores are actually fairly similar to Irish origin children, there are some groups who have lower vocabulary scores at age 5, and in particular, the children of East Europeans have much lower mean scores at age 5. Lower mean scores are also true for children who have both parents born abroad. Of course, there's some overlap here, and also where both parents are non-native English speakers. It may be of interest to some too to notice that this issue of one or both parents born abroad, we see actually no difference between parents with two Irish parents or two parents born in Ireland, or one born in Ireland and one abroad. And it's a fairly similar story if they have one native English speaker and one non-native English speaker. More broadly then, when we model these vocabulary scores and assess factors linked to English vocabulary, vocabulary is closely linked to parents' country of origin and linguistic background, not surprisingly. There's no additional effect of parents' minority ethnicity after country of origin and language have been controlled. Children from mixed backgrounds in the models, as well as the chart I just showed, do not differ in vocabulary from children with two Irish parents. In terms of schools, children in disadvantaged schools have lower vocabulary scores, even after family background controls. That's all children in disadvantaged schools, not particularly migrant children, but they do too. There's been a lot of international interest in the proportion of migrants in schools and the idea that having a lot of migrant children in particular schools, a high concentration, may result in poorer outcomes for either migrant children or all children. We find no evidence of that in Ireland. Having a high proportion of migrants in your school is not associated with reading scores after we control for family background characteristics. Turning now to over time, this chart focuses on the lowest vocabulary scores, the bottom fifth, or as it's called, quintile of reading scores. It shows the proportion of different groups of children who are in this bottom fifth, the lowest vocabulary scores, the ones who aren't doing so well at naming vocabulary and then subsequently reading. This blue line is for both parents born abroad. The red line is both Irish, and the green line is one parent born abroad. So remember, this is the same children that were surveyed when they were age 3, age 5, and age 9. The most striking thing, certainly for me, is that while at age 3, 60% of children where both parents were born abroad were in this lowest fifth of reading scores. That fell somewhat at age 5, where just over half of them were in this lowest quintile. But by age 9, just 26% of these same children were in the lowest fifth of reading scores. So they almost catch up with the children who have the Irish origin children here, where 20% of them were in the lowest reading quintile at age 9. This finding is also replicated for children who have two non-English speaking parents. It's a very similar pattern. So migrant origin children progress faster in English language development than their Irish peers. This is particularly true between 5 and 9. They move out of this lowest fifth of vocabulary and almost catch up, so that by age 9, there are much smaller differences between migrant origin and Irish origin children. Turning now to their self-concept. This measure, as I said, incorporates children's sense of their intellectual, educational, physical, emotional, and social characteristics, their self-esteem, their sense of themselves from the children's own responses to this question. It's measured on a scale, the Piers-Harris scale, that runs from 0 to 31. So as you'll see, the averages at around 26, 27 are pretty high overall for this cohort of children. And there's also, there's not very many differences between the different groups here. The 26, 27, some groups have slightly lower self-concept scores as reported by the children with both parents born abroad, both minority ethnicity, non-native English speakers. But in the models, we conclude that migrant origin children in general do not differ from Irish origin children in their self-concept. There are other factors that are more important for understanding how children see themselves at age 9. Having two parents, parents with more resources in terms of money, education, being a girl, not having special needs, and playing a team sport, for example, are all associated with higher self-concept. Having no native English speaking parent was associated with lower self-concept, but largely explained by socioeconomic resources. We can talk a little bit more about that at the end. After all controls, West European origin kids actually have the lowest self-concept and African origin kids the highest. But actually, I think the main message is the differences are very small. What are the implications of these findings for policy? Migrant origin children in general are progressing well in English language skills in primary school. I think that's very clear from some of the results found, and it's also clear in the report. Though we would argue it's useful to monitor policy effort for those struggling and to see whether language supports that are available to schools are actually meeting the needs of English language learners. It's not currently possible to do this under the general allocation model of funding for schools. The findings do, as the Minister suggested, highlight the importance of accessing quality learning at preschool for migrant origin kids, who certainly in this cohort are less likely to be attending centre-based care, but more likely to benefit from it when they do. So this is where they are not doing so well. Of course, children at 3 will spend more time with their parents in the early years of their lives. They spend more time with their parents, but some early learning in a centre-based setting or with a childminder is very beneficial. Migrant origin children are more likely to be in DEIS, urban band 1 schools, so enhanced supports here will be useful. And I suppose this is the point that recurs in research on migrant integration. Supporting parents' language would be useful to promote liaison with schools and also to help parents support their children's learning. That's just some key messages now. I think I must be nearly done. I mean, if there's only a few things you're going to take away, it's linguistic background matters more than parental region of origin or ethnicity. Strong performance. Migrant children really make very strong headway in their English language skills between age 3 and 9, although at 9, children who have both parents who are non-native English speakers are at a disadvantage. Children with 1 Irish parent or 1 English-speaking parent do not differ in terms of language skills from children with 2. And we find little or no difference in self-concept between these kids. Thanks for listening. Comments welcome, not now, as Emer said, but a little bit later in this session. So do put them in the Q&A. I've added the link there if you'd like to read more. The report is up on the ESRI website, and as a little sneak preview of what's coming soon in the research programme on migrant integration, if you're interested in integration, we will soon be publishing a report on housing and family of migrants in Ireland using census data. This is issues like overcrowding, intermarriage, which of course intermarriage is closely related to some of the findings in this report. And in the research programme on children and young people. The next report is on disrupted transitions, the impact of COVID on the 98 cohort. That's how COVID has impacted transitions from education into the labour market and on these young people's mental health. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fran, for a very clear presentation of some very rich and highly policy relevant findings. So, as I said, the purpose of this programme has been to provide evidence for policy making. So we're very glad to have 2 respondents. I can see that Deanna has joined us live, so I'm delighted to welcome her. But first of all, we're going to go to Ann Duffy, who's with the Department of Children Equality, Disability Integration and Youth, and heads up the Equality and Gender Equality function there, to give a first response to the study findings. Please keep adding your questions and comments in the Q&A function. I'll hand over to you, Ann. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Emer. And I want to thank Frances McGinnity, Merike, Darmody and Helen Russell for this really important piece of research. Just to give a little bit of context from my role, I lead the Equality and Gender Equality Unit in the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth. And my role involves responsibility for policy and legislation on integration, gender equality and gender equality structures. So this means that I have responsibility for the outgoing migrant integration strategy, as well as the National Strategy for Women and Girls, and also the ongoing review of the Equality Acts. As Mr. O'Gorman said in his opening remarks, this data and this research will really form a key input into, first of all, the evaluation of the current migrant integration strategy, and also importantly, the development of its successor. The migrant integration strategy is the framework for the whole of government approach to migrant integration, but the outgoing strategy has a particular focus on third country nationals, and we are aware that it doesn't necessarily engage in a structured way with second and third generation migrants, and that's where this type of research is really important. And the strategy was also quite focused on adult migrants rather than looking at the whole family. So we are now at the point of evaluation and assessment of the outgoing strategy. A final report is in preparation, and a common evaluation with the other outgoing strategies, including the Strategy for Women and Girls, is being commissioned. And this evaluation is going to look at how the strategies were structured, how they function, as well as identifying where indicators could be developed for the next generation of strategic policy. And that's where we come back to the importance of data like this. It's really invaluable for us in equality policy. It gives us an insight into the needs of the people we're developing the policies to support. And very importantly, it will help us to measure impacts and outcomes of policies being introduced. It's our intention that any future strategies would have baseline or a series of baselines drawing on this kind of information where progress can be measured. And as I've said, this kind of report will be very, very useful in that regard. Another aspect that we would hope to address in future strategies is the interrelation or the intersectionality of equality issues. And from my point of view, I wouldn't view this report as solely informing my work in integration. There are quite clear gender equality implications from some of the issues covered in this, such as the access to childcare and the corollary of access to employment and the socioeconomic situation of migrant women. And this kind of research can inform that as well. As I've said, integration is a whole of government action, and the interventions can range from high-level policies to interactions at community level. We're seeing from this report as well, you know, when you're looking at second and third generation children, they're a broad and diverse group. And it's very clear that any responses need to reflect the different needs. You know, there are children who are in different socioeconomic status. There are children who are in deaf schools. It must be acknowledged as well that while this research is going to give us extremely valuable new insights, there are issues raised in this that we are aware of already. And the report notes the importance of English language supports for the migrant parents. That is a feature of the current strategy. And we will be looking at evaluating how those actions have operated, but also looking at, do we need to look at new approaches? The other thing that comes through as well is the need for people to be aware of their entitlements. So that's particularly in terms of the access to childcare and around schooling. It's also something that's currently in the strategy, but we will need to look at how much impact that has had. Are there new ways of approaching that? Obviously, there are findings in this study that are really clear implications for my colleagues who work in childcare policy or for the Department of Education, and they will be looking at those in detail as well, and that will come into any new strategy because we would bring in actions across government. Personally, I was very interested in the finding around the importance of team sports for the second and third generation children. That's quite interesting. That's something, you know, we could look at specifically. We are obviously fully cognizant that any future strategy will need to reflect the particular experiences of second and third generation migrants. And many of those are children and young people. The development of any new strategy will really need to take a root and branch approach and look at what we mean by integration and whose needs we are meeting. As the Minister mentioned, the work of the Independent Anti-Racism Committee in developing a national anti-racism action plan would be very important in this context too. I'd also hope as well that we could build on this piece of research. As I mentioned, we're going to be looking at baselines, you know, to examine whether these are patterns particular to that cohort. And I note from the present the real specificity of this cohort, but is this a pattern that's continuing? Are these specific issues? We can't ignore the impact of COVID-19 on particular children. You know, we know that the closure of schools and childcare potentially had a disproportionate impact on the most vulnerable children in our society. What was the effect on children where, say, their parents didn't have as many social and family supports, where their parents weren't able to access that information? That'll be really important as well, I think, to monitor into the future. I'm very much looking forward to Diana's contribution to the discussion, because that's something I'm really interested in myself. We're going to be looking at consultations for the new strategy, and we really want to hear from the second and third generation people. We want to look at initiatives that they have. What are the issues, but also what do you think the solutions really are? So we are going to begin the examination of the policy to inform the new strategy towards the end of this year. We will be engaging in a consultation process and would hope to have as wide a reach as possible. So if you're listening to this today and you'd like to give us some input, please follow us so that we can reach you at the time. And we are also engaging with the CSO to examine the potential for the collection of equality data across all grounds and across government. And that'll be really important as well for the work on establishing the baselines. I want to thank the authors for this. It's a really useful piece of work, and I think it's going to be really helpful for us in the future.
Thank you very much, Jana. That's been a really helpful contribution, and it's great to know that the relevance of the research for the current work of the department. Now, I'm delighted to welcome Diana Hrisovescu, who is a student at Larkin Community College, and he's doing great work developing an app to support non-English speakers to access government information in a more accessible way. And she's going to give a response as a young person, a young woman of Romanian origin, to the findings of the study, and tell us a little bit more about what she thinks. Thank you very much, Diana. You're very welcome.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. It's such an honor, and I'm really grateful to be here and being able to log in online and just to do this. So my name is Diana Hrisovescu, and I'm Romanian, as you may all know. And I came to Ireland in 2017 with my father and my younger brother. I was 13 years old, so I love learning and I loved school. I experienced a lot of sadness in Romania, but when I came to Ireland during my time in education, there were no lessons where people spoke about the experiences of migrants. Maybe teachers didn't know how to speak about sad things. And I think it would have been really helpful if class groups could have conversations about how we all were and what we had in common and how we're dealing with life. Just space to listen in and share stories. So Thich Nhat Hanh, it's a Buddhist monk. He talks about how listening to each other's suffering can do a lot of help. And we don't do a lot of listening to each other in school. School life is too busy. I think lessons in philosophy would help us to understand how the world works a bit better. I also think that structured time for teachers and students to have important conversations like these about humans and being human are so important. I think some of my teachers were afraid of these kind of conversations, and some other students too. They're all new, so we can't really judge them. I had great friends in school from all over the world, But looking back, I really didn't understand the cultural differences between us, and especially how young men treat young women. There are cultural differences that, in my experience, can lead to stressful misunderstandings. And it would be really helpful if school had programs around consent and unconscious bias. My father became unwell during my time in secondary school, and it was quite stressful for me to find the best way to care for him. He doesn't speak much English, and letters, texts from school were mostly in English. And so I spent a lot of time translating for him. When we came to Ireland, we were offered emergency accommodation, and we had to negotiate with social services to survive. I was 13 and I started doing this. And looking back, it was, and it still is, a heavy burden. But I have no choice. I am resilient, and I wish we had resilience training in school. Learning about this would be so beneficial. What my friends and I love learning, what matters to us when we're 15, is knowing who we are, discovering ourselves. And sometimes the Irish education system ignores how humans develop and only wants to examine what the brain can hold as information. Despite the system, I have done well. I believe that this is because of the relationship I had with my teachers and my principal. Their love and kindness and belief in me helped me to do well academically and to stay strong when things got tough. I'm currently at Trinity College studying computer science and business, and I have lots of friends, but sometimes I feel lonely, like a fish out of the water. And some of it is to do with the overwhelming sense of sadness I sometimes feel. It's just like an empty void that I just can't put my finger on. However, I am so grateful for the relationships I had with my teachers and the principal in Larkin Community College. And I hope the Irish education system can focus more on nurturing those kind of relationships. They give us all a deeper sense of our common humanity. Thank you for listening to me, and I'm so grateful for being able to speak my experiences to you. Thank you.
Deanna, thank you so much for sharing your story and doing so eloquently. I think you've highlighted issues for young people of migrant origin, but more fundamental issues that we've been talking about and thinking about for a while about Irish education and about the importance of those relationships and the warmth between teachers and students, but also the importance of listening. And I agree that it has been squeezed out as out of the system in kind of favour of content, and that need to kind of, you know, promote life skills, resilience, critical thinking. All of that is really important for the future. So I think your credit to your current course, but to your teachers at Larkin Community College, and your credit to yourself. So I'm really glad you've joined us and you've added to that conversation. So we have a few questions and comments already, and all of you feel free to pitch in. I'll direct some towards people, and I might group them. We've had some questions about what was or wasn't covered in the study, and I might start with you on those, Helen. So did you look separately at whether it made a difference whether the mother or the father was the English speaker? Did you look at ethnicity and the possible role of racism there?
Yes, so we do have obviously the language of both parents. We didn't look separately. We were more concerned with whether there was one English speaker or no English speaker, I suppose, in the household. The issue of racism, this is something that is not, obviously we have ethnicity in all our models, but it's not something that we asked the children at this point in their lives about that experience at 9 years. It is asked at a later stage for the older cohort, and will hopefully be something that we can look at more closely for that age group. So I think that is an important issue for future research.
Yep. And we had another set of questions around kind of multilingual benefits and whether we know whether the children have plural language skills. Fran, could I direct that towards you?
Yes, we were focused on their English language skills. We have whether the child themselves said they were a native English speaker, was their first language, was English their first language, and we do note that this changes over time. Actually, what the children say is their first language, but we certainly didn't analyze any information on their second languages, and these languages are very diverse. Actually, it's I guess it would be possible to look.
I was just going to jump in there. So yeah, we have first language of the child. So I don't think multiple options were allowed there. We do know for the parents if they spoke multiple languages. So we did do some analysis of whether, you know, English plus one other language, English plus two other languages, whether that made a difference. And it wasn't coming out as significant, but I think it's probably something that could be explored in more detail. I mean, we were just looking at it, as I say, in that sort of grouped way. But I think there's really rich information there about you know, the combinations of languages. And I think, you know, there's Merike will probably be able to tell you more about the other research. But I know that, you know, there's research in language formation that says being exposed to multiple languages when you're younger then has beneficial impacts later on in cognitive development. So as we're saying here, we're focused just on English language skills for the reasons that Fran outlined. But obviously there is scope then to look further on whether those children who are exposed to multiple languages in the home, is there longer term benefits that we pick up later.
So if we can move on to talk about kind of early years and school provision. Jane-Ann, could I direct a question towards you, please? Like, what role do you think early years provision could have or should have in this process of integration? And we see from the findings that there's quite a language gap there at school start, which thankfully does close a good bit. But, you know, where would you see the kind of ESRI and other provision fitting in there?
I'm afraid that kind of falls outside my wheelhouse a bit because I don't really have the policy responsibility in there early, but I would say that obviously we're going to look at it with the colleagues who lead in the policy there. I think it's really important that we're looking at integration the whole way through, you know, at all of the life stages. So I think it's something we are going to look at, but I can't really go into the detail, I'm afraid.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose just speaking to the findings, you know, this and we do know that in some other countries there's actually specific supports for host country language in preschools. But I suppose what's more, what comes out more from our study is actually access at all, particularly to the expensive, and it's still expensive, but we do acknowledge all the efforts of the department to address that. And you know, in 2021 it still was one of the most expensive private childcare in Europe for parents. And, you know, these migrant parents, you know, they may come to work, they get low-skilled, low-paying jobs, and they just can't afford childcare. The other issue is also important about whether they've heard about it, whether they know about it, and the participation in this cohort in the ESRI scheme is certainly much higher. That's free to parents. It's just 3 hours a day, so it's a little bit. It's a sort of low hours intervention.
Thanks, Fran. And there was another question about, you know, the need for additional supports in DESH schools. The commentator asked what supports would be most helpful here, perhaps for DESH schools, but even more generally. Merike, could I direct you towards that?
Hi. Yes, we did indicate in our conclusions that because quite a high proportion of migrant children attend DESH schools, then these schools should get, you know, more support. But as it was indicated earlier as well, I think that it is really essential to really know whether all children who do need English language support really can get it, and it would be really useful for us to be able to monitor it over time as well. So in terms of like a specific supports, I think to some extent schools have autonomy, you know, to put in supports for particular groups of students. And obviously it's important to note as well that migrant children have access to the supports that are available to all children, but some may need additional and targeted help.
I suppose just to if I could add in there, because the question in the chat was asking, was there evidence that migrant students in DEIS schools perform differently than non-migrant students? So what we found was actually it was the same. It didn't differ. So there was a lower reading scores at 9 for those in the DEIS. It was particularly in the DEIS urban band 1 schools, so that those that were had the most disadvantaged intake. But it was the same. It was the same for migrant and non-migrant students. So it was all students in that school. So I suppose we're in a sense we're talking about general supports as well, and additional resources to those particularly disadvantaged schools.
Thanks, Helen. That's very useful. Now, there's a question here that's very interesting about, you know, whether parents' own skills develop as their child goes through school. I know we don't have that from growing up in Ireland, but are any of you aware of international research around that? It's an interesting idea. No, if nothing comes to mind, yeah.
Emer, we have information at the very lowest at the bottom level for parents in terms of whether they can you know, is it buy things at the shop, or, you know, very can they fill in forms, so very basic numeracy and literacy skills, but that, as I say, would be relatively few parents. So I guess in principle with GUI you could look at that. Certainly most of the material I've come across is the impact of parents' low language skills on interactions with schools or institutions, and not being, like Diana was talking about, not being able to acquire the resources or the entitlements of their that the children are actually entitled to, but the parents don't know about it because their language is insufficient. I'm very encouraged to hear that Ann Duffy was saying that has been a priority in the migrant integration strategy about adult English language skills, and, you know, there may be potential actually to encourage parents, you know, as parents, that it will help their children's education to participate in English language training. And I'm also optimistic that you know, maybe the move to online will make it easier for very busy migrant parents who, you know, potentially live in rural areas or were just very busy to tune into online training, but that may be misguided optimism in terms of how much it will facilitate this. Emer, if I can just pull up one point on the query on racism. Helen addressed the fact that we didn't ask about the children's own experiences of racism. We did look at whether it made a difference whether the parents were minority ethnicity, that's Black, Asian or other ethnicity. And what we find is that actually in terms of both language skills and self-esteem, that it doesn't matter once you control for the parental language, the English speaking, that there's no additional difference in Black, Asian or other parents. So actually it hadn't made, I've been done a lot of work on the experience of discrimination among adults in Ireland, so I was potentially very interested in this. That's not to say, of course, that in later years when these children grow older, or when they're in secondary school, later in the teenage years and young adulthood, that this may be when problems emerge. But as we said, at this age, you know, in terms of sort of overall well-being and self-esteem, we don't find differences once we can.
Okay, thanks. And linked to that, I mean, I think there's the issue that one of in the chat brought up about, you know, the implications of young people like Diana having to be the kind of mediator, if you like, between their parents and health and social care services. Jane Ann, are you in position yet to say anything about the direction of thought, even about where provision for adult migrants might go, language provision, especially in terms of what we now know about potential online or other forms of delivery?
Not at present, no. Those services are delivered through the Department of Education or the Department of Further and Higher Education, whereas we coordinate the whole of government policy. But I would say that the experiences of second and third generation, and that would be things like this, where maybe the children have to be the frontline interaction with services. That's something I think that we probably would try to be cognizant of when we're looking at that bit about information and access. We are aware that there are issues in terms of a lot of efforts have been made to try and make information available about entitlements or to provide interpretation services and translation of information. Is that, are we necessarily reaching everybody with that? Is there scope to try and work on that as well? Because you don't want this to be a burden on children, which it is. It's very difficult to have to be the interlocutor when you're a child yourself.
Yeah, and of course it's an even more complex position if you're mediating with the school where there might be issues around behavior or so on. So we had a very interesting question from Jan Skopek about, where should we be going policy-wise? Should we be, fostering bilingualism among children? Should we be encouraging parents to switch to the English language? I don't know if anyone wants to kind of take that. I know it's a big question.
Shall I?
Yeah, go
for it. Well, I think obviously for amongst our research on adults as well, that we know that proficiency in English language for the parents is really important in terms of integration into employment and access to higher level jobs. And in terms of the issues that we're talking about, interacting with different institutions. So I suppose there's benefits across a whole range of areas for that language proficiency. But obviously that's not to say that bilingualism isn't also a huge benefit. So it's not that we want English to replace people's first language, so I think that's definitely not the message that we want to come out of this one. But yes, I don't know if Merike, if you have more there on the sort of language support.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that perhaps we should also recognize the great work that is being done by all the Saturday and Sunday schools that the communities have set up, to support the mother tongue of the child, and they have now functioned for quite a number of years, and some are more established than others. And I'd say that they also kind of have dual benefits, because they don't focus just on maintaining the home language, but also, provide information about culture and to keep ties with the culture of home languages. Where the mother tongue or maintenance of mother tongue is important is to maintain intergenerational links, because where people have relatives and grandparents, etc., still in their home countries, and there have been some indications that occasionally those communication lines can be adversely affected if the focus is solely on acquisition of the language of the host country and not keeping the mother tongue alive.
And I've just one final point to add, Emer, to Jan's question. I think in terms of schools and preschools, they may be quite limited in their ability to support the learning of mother tongue, but a recognition, perhaps a greater recognition of a plural diversity of languages could be very useful, so that these children, in terms of their own identity, don't feel so that there's credit given, if you like, and a recognition and perhaps greater awareness in schools of bilingualism, multilingualism, not necessarily, teaching Polish after school in the schools. This is obviously logistically exceptionally difficult. This is, but because there are so many languages, for one thing, but that there would be greater recognition, I think, would be in some ways perhaps an easy and certainly low cost thing for schools to do.
Okay, well, that takes us very neatly to the end of our time. So I'd like to thank the audience for coming along and the engagement in terms of questions. I'd really like to thank the authors for a wonderful report and a great presentation in response to the questions. I'd like to thank the Minister in absentia for his commitment and support for this research programme. I'd like to thank Jane Ann and Deanna, and we wish Deanna the best of luck, if she's still there, with the best of luck with her app and with her future career in computer sciences. So thank you very much.